Despite losing a host of all-conference studs from last year's team, I'm going to tell you why this year's Kansas team actually might be a little bit more talented than the 2024 version.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on? Derek Johnson here. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day. And thank you to the everydayers listening to each and every show or watching on our YouTube page, where you can like and subscribe to the show for free, as well as anywhere you get your audio side of things with the podcast. And on today's edition of LOJ, we're talking just how talented is this KU football roster, because by one, I guess, metric or score, you can make an argument that this actually is a more talented team than last year. And that sounds crazy to say based on all the accolades that some of those players had. But I don't know, but we'll let the numbers do the speaking on this one. We'll also get into some of the latest news to round things out at the end of the show, including with a former KU football player with Austin Booker, some recruiting news, and plenty more coming at you on the show, which is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase with Game Time. Okay, so just how talented is this KU football roster, and how does it compare to, last year's squad, but previous year's squads in general? Because I think certainly you look at last year's team for Kansas as being one that, yes, it probably it did underachieve to what the talent was on the roster. Some of that, you can explain in different ways, but was a talented team. And the core of those players were from the year before when they won 9 games. It was a talented roster, from KU speaking and by KU standards. And so the natural inclination would be, oh my gosh, you lose Devin, Neal, you lose Cobee, Bryant, you lose Mello Dotson, you lose Marvin Grant, you lose J.B. Brown, you lose your 3 starting receivers. How could this team be more talented than what they were a season ago? And yes, maybe last year's team had more experience, but from a pure talent standpoint, this one might actually be a little bit better. So how we wanted to devise and look into this, we wanted to, Bud Elliott, who does a great job on Cover 3, which is a podcast talking college football, does something called the blue chip ratio. And the blue chip ratio is something he created in 2013, which is, it's more so used to devise who can win a national championship. When we get to March Madness and our bracket pick and we talk about who can and can't win the national title based on these precursors, Bud Elliott has created this, formula basically that just looks at the number of 4- and 5-star recruits that a team has over their, incoming recruiting classes, and that basically they have to have more than, 50% to, like every team who's won the title since 2013 has had a higher than 50%. It's basically a very simple way of looking at roster talent, right? It's not the be-all, end-all, because there are, especially nowadays with the transfer portal, that's a different way to add roster talent. But usually high school recruiting is like, I don't know, it represents a ceiling. Like a 4-star high school recruit is a little different than a 4-star transfer recruit. The 4-star transfer recruit is probably going to, very high chance, will be a highly productive player. But the 4-star high school recruit maybe has a much lower floor, but maybe has a higher ceiling to be like a high-round NFL draft pick. So that's why they look at it. And typically, it's very helpful for the national champions, but something Bud Elliott talks about is that it's not as helpful for devising which teams are going to make the playoff, how many teams are going to win a bowl game, are you going to go over/under on your win total? Like he talks about that, yeah, it's only really applicable for who's going to win the title and who has the requisite for that. So, you do take this with a grain of salt that me going over these numbers for what they are or what they would be for Kansas are not going to be as helpful. I more so am interested in them, not from that perspective. I'm more so interested in them just from the standpoint where we started this conversation. KU lost all these really talented players, Devin, Neal, Cobee, Bryant, so on, to where the question coming into the year is, oh, I know they had maybe bad luck in 1-score games and yada, 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 but they're going to be less talented than they were a season ago. And that's where I want to use this to say that is actually false. Yes, again, maybe it's less experience, but it's not less talent on this year's team for KU football. So what we did is we went ahead and put together The blue chip ratio, which again is defined as by Bud Elliott with CBS, 4 and 5-star recruits compared to the number of recruits that you have in a given class. And I wanted to get a different look, just look at how many players in the recruiting classes are 3 stars or higher, because I think that's been something too that this Lance Leipold, like obviously Kansas isn't reeling in a ton of 4 and 5-star recruits in football, but we've seen, I think, a higher consistency of the 3-star recruits with Lance Leipold than maybe you saw in previous seasons, to where that number is rising as well. So I'm going to share my screen here on YouTube, and I'll do the best to present this if you're listening on the audio side of things. But pretty much for Kansas, the overall, like you look at the high school recruiting classes that they've brought in under the Lance Leipold era. Every season of the Lance Leipold era, so class of 22 and on, they've brought in a 3-star or higher percentage of 87.5% or higher. Their blue chip ratio the last 3 years, or the last 2 years, right? 2026 is still ongoing, but coming into this roster, 6.25% in 2025, 11.76% in 2024. There's no other seasons that surpassed the 6.25% until you go back to 2011 with Turner Gill, which was 9.38%. So 2024 was better than that. And the 3-star percentage, again, being in the green, 90% or higher. If you look at the pre-Lance Leipold days, you have a year with, I guess, Emmett Jones, Les Miles, where they had about 91% of their recruiting class in 2021 was 3 stars or higher. And I think that bared itself out, right? KU had a lot of success over these recent seasons with a lot of those players who were in that class. You look at the class of 2020 and 2019, that was hovering around 80%. And then you look at the classes from 2011 through 2018, only one of them surpassed the 60% clip for 3+ star recruit, and that was Turner Gill in 2011. So it's like, oh, it makes sense. Kansas didn't have good coaching, and they didn't have, super talented rosters. But now the beauty of it is you have good coaching with Lance Leipold, and you have more talented rosters than in recent years. So I also wanted to take a look at, given the high school classes, putting it all together, what each team would have. So if you're watching on YouTube, this would be the column over to the right side here, where it is basically taking into account, KU's high school recruiting. And I added some transfer stuff, which we'll get to here in a second, but over the years. So basically, if you're looking at the 2025 season for KU, the blue chip ratio is the combination of their class of 2025, class of 2024, class of 2023, and class of 2022. Their 4 most recent classes. Obviously, there are exceptions with, players taking red shirts, being 5th-year guys, whatever. But for the most part, it's those 4 classes put together. And you see, if you base it off of that, so that's just 4 and 5-star recruits, which obviously is a small minority of the KU roster. But Kansas in 2024 had a 4.48% blue chip ratio. In 2025, it's 4.92%, meaning that the blue chip ratio is actually higher on this year's team than it was last year. If we just look at the 3-year blue chip ratio, because that's something I wanted to put into this, given the fact that, if you bring in players, from the class of, 2025 who are rated highly, but how much are they actually going to play on the 2025 team? So for the 3-year blue chip ratio, we looked at the 3 previous classes. So for the 2025 team, that would be the class of 2024, class of 2023, and the class of 2022, not even counting this year's class. And the 3-year blue chip ratio, 4.4%. Last year, it was at 2%. So you're doubling up on that number for KU. Then you look at the 3+ star percentage ratio. Kansas this year will have a percentage of those 4 incoming recruiting classes at 93.4%. Last year, it was at 92.5%, so a little bit higher there. Again, if we look at just the 3 classes, not the incoming class, but the 3 before it, 22, 23, 24, 93% for KU. If we look at last year's 3-year incoming class for 3-star higher percentage, 90%. So again, you're higher in 2025. And by the way, if you're watching on YouTube, yes, the 2026 class, that gets you really excited because those numbers are really, really good, what that could possibly be. So then I also wanted to add in the idea of, the transfers coming into this. So I want to get to that when we come back from the break here. This is Locked on Jayhawks. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by Game Time. We've all been there, logging on early, waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot for a show you've been dying to see. Live music should be about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping. That's where Game Time comes in. And it should be no different if you're buying sports tickets, right? Maybe you're looking to just go to, I don't know, a family-friendly fun event, I guess, with a preseason game where you can get in cheap for the Chiefs and Bears. You can do that on Game Time. Tickets as low as $33. You can also look at the Royals right now, kind of winding down on the MLB season as we head into the fall. And beauty of baseball, you can just kind of get last minute tickets, and that's the beauty of Game Time as well. Friday, Royals playing the White Sox, so better chance of getting a win. Bring out the blue t-shirt day, and you can get tickets as low as $14 for that game on Friday night. I toggle my include fees, and that is $14 including fees. You can, if you want to spend a bit more of a pretty penny, but I think still really good deal here. $94 row E. So that's like the fifth row up in the dugout box, section 123 at the time of recording here on Game Time. So check that out and plenty other offers over with Game Time. Take the guesswork out of buying show tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Hi, thanks for joining us on this episode of Locked on Jayhawks. Don't forget you make Locked on College Football or Locked on College Basketball your second listen every day. All right, so we're going over some of the roster talent numbers for KU. And just to reiterate, the roster talent for KU, if you look at the blue chip ratio, the percentage of your 4- and 5-star recruits in the incoming 4 high school classes, the 3-year blue chip ratio, where you're just looking at not the incoming high school class, but the 3 years before it for the guys who are more developed. You look at the percentage of 3-star or higher recruits over the previous 4 or 3 classes. KU's this year team in 2025 bests the team in 2024 in all of those categories. So, hence, the 2025 roster is at least a little bit more talented than the 2024 version. Now, what if we factor in for this with transfers as well? So we decided to take a look at, obviously, the transfer ratings. And these are all through 24/7 Sports, I should probably mention, with their transfer ratings here, as well as the high school ratings. So with 24/7 Sports, the high school or the transfers, we wanted to take a look at their high school ratings because this is based on the idea of what is your true talent, so to speak. This isn't as much about production, which is more what sometimes the transfer ratings end up being. Wanted it to be more about potential, right? And potential doesn't always mean everything, but you give a good coaching staff like Lance Leipold more potential. Last year type of seasons are going to happen less often than 2023 type of seasons, in my opinion, for a school like Kansas. So you look at the transfer portal, and Kansas obviously bringing in a much higher blue chip ratio of transfer portal players than they are from the high school ranks. That's their opportunity to get some of those, former 4 and in one case 5-star recruits, and Logan Brown is the answer there. And so if we look at a combination of blue chip ratio for transfer plus high school players, you look at it, and this goes back, the transfer rankings go back, I think, to 2021. So you have 3.57 in 2021, 5.5% in 2022, 6.8% in 2023, 11.0% in 2024, and 12.6% in 2025. So again, even if you're factoring in the transfers, this roster, by that metric, more talented than last year. The final one is just that 3-year of that same idea, and that is actually one that is lower than 2024, 13.2% to 12.9%. But every other number we're talking about here, it belongs to the 2025 team, that it's more talented. And even if you want to say it's similarly talented, but the 2024 team had more experience, okay, but the experience didn't matter in the 1-score games. And so it's like, isn't that supposed to be the whole idea of the experience? And so if it didn't end up mattering, then why should it matter now? Just give me the pure talent. Give me Lance Leipold. And yes, there are certain positions where experience matters. I think Kansas has it at quarterback. That's one of those where it does matter. Offensive line is another one, and that kind of is a question mark for Kansas at this point in time. But you still do have some experienced guys like, Cobee Baines and Bryce Foster, and at least in the program with Calvin Clemens. So Why this matters, KU's lost a lot from last year's team. Again, we go down the list of players. I mean, Devin, Neal, most accomplished running back in KU football history, with a program that's had unbelievable running backs. You lose your 3 starting receivers. You lose your all Big 12 fullback, kind of H-back type in Jared Casey. You lose your bookend tackles who were so good for you last season. You lose all sorts of players on the defense led by Cobee, Bryant, and Mello Dotson to kind of infuse in that secondary. Kansas lost a lot from last season. Kansas lost a lot of talent from last season. A lot of those guys are award-winning players, right? But that doesn't mean they're losing all their talent. That doesn't mean that they're less talented. Good programs continue to develop talent. And so I guess the point is this. Yes, Kansas has lost a lot of good, impactful, fun players that everybody loved, but that again does not mean that they don't still have talent cultivating in the wings, that they haven't recruited other talent that's waiting for their opportunity. That doesn't mean that they still don't have dudes. It just that some of them are unproven. But again, this is what happens in college sports. This is what happens in college football. There's so many players, there's so many starters. You're going to consistently have roster turnover. How do you develop the guys behind the guys as the years are going on, right? We don't see it. We don't see the everyday in practice, but it's just as important. And that's where cultivating that talent, and I believe Lance Leipold and Matt Gildersleeve and his staff to be very good at the development side of college football. And so if you're telling me this roster is just as talented as last year's, if not slightly more, and you have a coach who you trust in development, then you look back at last year to me and you go, okay, sure, could that happen again? Yeah, it just happened. Of course it can happen again. But it's also one of those things where it's like, there were so many things that went wrong for Kansas last season to where, like, if just a couple of those things don't go wrong, things are so different last year. They were still so close to making a bowl game. They still beat 3 of the top 4 teams in the Big 12 who tied for first in the league, and they very well could have beat the other one in Arizona State, who almost beat Texas in the college football playoff. And so from trusting a coach to develop that talent and to get the most out of this, like, again, there are years where other good coaches have down years, even if they, like, shoot, man, I don't know. Iowa's kind of a butt of a joke at this point with like the offense and the lack of quarterback play and stuff. But like, you look at Kirk Ferentz and like he's had so many 9-10 win seasons at Iowa, ranked seasons at Iowa. They had so much returning talent on last year's team. They finished like 8th. Or they finished 8-5, I mean to say. And it's because they had 3 games, I'm pretty sure, where they were up by like 10 or more points and they lost the game. Like, that never happens for Iowa with their defense and special teams. And they lost those games. Sometimes weird things happen in a given season when you're not the Georgias of the world who, oh, okay, well, the weird thing happened. Now we only won 42-10 instead of 42-3. It's just a different line that these schools, some of them are playing on. And so I do trust that, okay, give me all this. And I guess if you have what's essentially across the board a similar to, if not slightly more talented, 1 through 85 on the roster, because that's part of this too. Like maybe it was more about the names on last year's roster that boosted up the talent, but maybe the depth wasn't as good as this year's team. Maybe that's why this one is viewed as, by some of those numbers, as just as talented, if not slightly more. Maybe it's more about the depth than it is about the frontline guys. And you could say, okay, well, give me the frontline guys, but in football, we know depth matters, right? Football, depth matters a lot more than, say, basketball. And so you add in that now you are going to have a chip on your shoulder with talent coming off a 5-7 season, coming on to a season where people are doubting you, where you hope you're going to have better luck in one-score games, at least a little bit better luck in score games. And that to me is the summation of how you end up winning, 7 or 8 games in a season, which is right on what KU's over-under win total is. So pretty cool to see the talent level on this team. It wasn't maybe as big of a drain as you might have thought, even though those players, are missed and had great careers. All right, we're going to continue on with the show with Locked On Jayhawks, some of the latest news about Austin Booker and big recruiting news for KU as well. Thanks for joining us on Locked On Jayhawks. Again, don't forget you make Locked On College Football your second listen every day, or Locked On College Basketball your second listen, or make it your third listen after you listen to Locked On College Football for your second listen every day as well. Okay, so the preseason is going on in the NFL, and Austin Booker was absolutely dominant. 3-sack game for Austin Booker in the preseason. He is somebody who you think about him just coming on the scene so quickly at Kansas his first year. And first of all, that also should, going back to our conversation, give you a little hope that, like, if you remember, there was like Austin Booker coming into the year. It was like, oh, you got this interesting transfer from Minnesota. And it's like, I don't even know if he's going to be a starter, though. It's like, okay, I think he's an interesting player. He's got good potential. He should be a solid player. But, like, how good is he going to be? And then he just comes out right away and he's like, oh, this dude is, like, legit. This dude's a freak, in a positive way. And so that's like an opportunity where it's like there might be certain positions or players coming into this year where you're thinking, I don't know, that might be a little scary. I don't know how this position. And then all of a sudden somebody ends up being a stud, right? But yeah, Booker, cool to see and hope he can translate that to the regular season where he could have that kind of breakout season he saw in his year at Kansas after transferring in from Minnesota. This was crazy as well in women's golf. So the U.S. Women's Amateur Championship, Brooke Bierman went to the championship after 19 holes. So it's kind of like match play, I guess. And you get there by making a certain point. It's the crazy run of how it took her to get there. She was down 3 with 4 holes to go. Then she was down 2 with 2 holes to go, forced a playoff, won the playoff, moved on to the championship round. Unbelievable performance there. That was really cool for KU women's golf. I mentioned some recruiting news. That would be on the volleyball front for KU. I mean, there's a lot of recruiting news. There always is going on. I know basketball, you have all sorts of scheduled visits and players narrowing their lists and stuff. This one is concrete because it's a commitment. I guess nowadays commitments aren't that concrete, but you know what I mean. This was Marissa Jones, who is listed as a top 10 overall recruit, according to Prep Volleyball, and one of the top 2 setters in the class of 2027. She's 6'2" as well. And that's a huge deal because it allows you to play a certain style in volleyball. I mean, I don't want to get in the weeds on volleyball semantics for people, but like basically some teams play 2 setters, some play 1. And that sometimes what goes into that calculation is if you have a shorter setter, you don't want them playing at the front where, they're just going to be shorter than the other players going up against them. So having a 6'2" setter is super valuable. And this is obviously a very talented one, top 10 recruit in the country. And the setter's like the quarterback, where like you have a good setter, anything is possible in volleyball. So awesome news there for Matt Ulmer and KU volleyball. And then I wanted to make a mention of this, but I saw the number was officially out for the Rock Chalk Roundball Classic, mentioning $225,000 for donations for the year. So another great year there for Brian Haney and the Rock Chalk Roundball Classic. And just to let you know, like, you can donate year round. So if you're into the cause, if you want to give like monthly donations, or you're like, I was a little late to it, but it's something that I'm interested in, I just forgot to get to it when it was happening, like, you can still donate. It'll go to the next year's cause. Like, so highly recommend doing that. But that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page, where you can like and subscribe to the show. See you next time for another edition of LOJ.